freezing today. I was opening the doors and trying to get some heat in, you know. That's why I said, we'll just.
Oh, you did?
It's on and we're live streaming.
Thank you.
I don't know if we're back fully in person again or not.
Calling to order this April 11th, 2024 meeting of the Lexington Planning Commission at 5:01 PM with all members of the commission and staff in attendance. Our next order of business is to approve the agenda. Are we all good with the agenda?
I move that we approve the agenda as presented.
I second.
Doesn't make a difference.
Okay, all in favor, say aye. Aye. All opposed? Excellent. Approval of the minutes from the March 28th meeting. Any comments, suggestions, emendations to what looked to be, as usual, full and accurate representations?
I move to approve the minutes as presented.
Second.
All good. No discussion further. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Nobody? Okay. Number 4, citizens' comments on matters not on the agenda.
This is a record.
Actually, nobody. 0 other human beings
In the room.
in the room. In the room, there are other human beings. We will then close this to all human beings and move on to new business. A little curveball. First order of business, which is a request to defer the conditional use permit 2024-02, which is an application by John Adamson of Rockbridge Partners LLC to renew a conditional use permit allowing a portion of the building located to South Main Street tax map number 23-1-194 and owned by Rockbridge Partners LLC to be used as Assembly Hall. Arnie will tell us what is going on.
There is an updated request by the applicant to defer this until the second meeting in May. There's some complications with the deed restrictions. Luckily, there was a recommendation to go research the deed restrictions because they did have an impact. Just quickly, as an example, there were a number of deed restrictions. One of them said that the public meeting room, that is the deed room and the vault room and however else it was named, only had to be made available to the public for 15 years. Not to say that the applicant doesn't want to continue with that, but he's just trying to figure out how he wants to move forward. Also slightly more complicated by the current planning that's going on by Main Street Lexington for the courtyard space around the building, because the recommendations currently are that things get moved around and that may affect the deed restrictions. So he's just trying to get an overall picture of what's going to happen with the property before he made a decision on how to move forward. So therefore asking for a deferral until the second meeting in May.
Okay.
I'm sorry, the second meeting in April.
You said May.
You said May.
May.
I meant
Okay.
Well, somewhere it said
Somewhere it
April.
say April.
Yeah.
Since I called him this morning and asked if he would be ready by
So we need to check.
April 25th, and the answer was no, because he has to have that answer to us by next Thursday, and he didn't have time with travel and whatnot. So he's asking for a little bit more time to the second meeting in May.
Okay.
Which would be the 23rd, I guess.
Oh,
Not the 25th?
of May?
No, sir. Oh, you said, sorry.
The first meeting in May? Is it-
Still in
Second.
April.
Meeting in-
Second.
Oh, okay.
And that's the 23rd.
So,
All right, so I guess it's good we deferred this last time, right? And we put it off making a recommendation. So does anybody have any objections to doing that? No? Do we need a motion to defer?
I move to defer CUP 2024-02 to our second meeting in May. Is that May 23rd?
May
May
23rd.
23rd.
second.
Okay. All in favor of that motion, say aye. Aye. All opposed? All right, that's taken care of. So we move on to our second and bigger order of business, which is the zoning ordinance amendments 2024-02, annual zoning ordinance amendments, so-called batch B, in particular mobile restaurants.
Correct. We had talked through concessions and decided that wasn't needed as far as additional amendments to the zoning ordinance. And then we started in on mobile restaurants and going back through the audio from the last meeting, there were a couple of concerns. So one was the fact that we needed a permit process. And the second one was how to sort of perhaps provide design guidelines for each of the parks if we wanted to get down to that level and providing for each of the parks. I started into that process and it was kind of complicated. How do you start grouping the similar parks together and how are you going to provide separate design guidelines for mobile restaurants for each of those? So instead of doing that, I thought, well, let's take the other tactic, which is seeing if we can make it a permitted use in the parks and open space. And I'm talking about only about mobile restaurants right now. Mobile restaurants, food trucks, food carts, food trailers, can they be allowed in the parks and open space zoning district where again, we own most of the parks and open space zoning district, City of Lexington does. And can we do that as a permitted use? And when we choose which parks, we are very specific on how we do that. And then it is through an agreement process. And by that, I mean the city has to agree to allow a vendor to come into our park. So on page 19, as an example, picking up again with the use and design standards for mobile restaurants in item subsection C, mobile restaurants, the way we have it currently, may operate on either public property or private commercially zoned property with written permission from the owner. So those are the two instances where a mobile restaurant can operate. And keep in mind also, I forgot to mention, there is that sort of large exemption where a mobile restaurant can operate in conjunction with an event and not be subject to all of these rules and regulations. So if you think about the number of events that we have, some of them are in these parks, particularly in Brubaker, and it wouldn't apply in those instances. So that's one exemption already. So an option to then change this subsection C to state that mobile restaurants may operate again on private or on public commercially zoned property, on private commercially zoned property with written permission from the owner, or the addition would be in Jordan's Point Park, Brubaker Field Sports Complex, and any other public park that you want to add to the list, or if you want to subtract one of those two, however we specify which parks it would be allowed, and then add to that with a written agreement with the city of Lexington. Spoke to the city manager, we would be entering into agreement anyway. And it would be entering into an agreement with a vendor. An example is Bither Outdoor. They rented kayaks last summer for 3 months. So they had a 3-month contract that went through the city manager's office and was reviewed by city council. So there's some oversight there on how that particular agreement and how that user operates within the city park. So we could still come up with a permit process, but then we might be doubling up the effort there. So the proposal that I have for you is just that, changing subsection C to add in specific parks, and we still have to decide which ones, as long as there's a written agreement with the city. And then the second part of that is on page 21, which is simply updating the use matrix for mobile restaurants to add a by right use in parks and open space, but with a note that mobile restaurants are only allowed in George Point Park and Brubaker Field Sports Complex with a written agreement with the city of Lexington. Is that sufficient? Now, at your last meeting, there was some question of if we make it a by right use, we have to be very specific. We don't want people to automatically think that it's by right in parks and open space and I can go to any of our parks and set up. So hopefully this is clear enough. We have other instances where we do use the notations in the use matrix. Bed and breakfasts are an example. They're only allowed along 3 major streets, and we note that in the use matrix. So I guess the question is that sufficient for what I think I heard by listening through the tape, that we can make it a by right use as long as it's clear that it's only in limited parks and through some sort of permit process, which this permit process would actually be the agreement that they have to go through with the city manager's office and be reviewed by council.
I have a question or a couple. So would that be, so first of all, would it be at all times and like, and would the permits be limited by like per year or like how often would it be unlimited forever and ever? Or, and would the times that like if I was a food truck vendor, I could go at any time that it was open to the public? So like, I don't know what the hours are, but 9 to 5 or 9 to 9 or whatever.
That's a good question in the sense that we would still, all the rest of these use and design standards would still apply because it doesn't get you out of that. There's no exemption to those.
Mhm.
So could the agreement provide an exemption? I can't remember. Setup time is for only for so long. Could they operate for longer than the setup time in the agreement just because the agreement is made? But I think to answer the initial question is no, the rest of these standards still apply. And I guess the follow-up question, which I don't know the answer to at the moment, is can that agreement allow something beyond what is in the use and design standards that we currently have? Again, an example is we have a setup time, and I'm trying to go from memory, apologize for that, which you can only set up for 5 hours or so, and that includes setup and takedown. Could somebody set up in Jordan's Point Park for the entire day based on an agreement? And I don't know the answer at the moment.
Is that,
Well, this says a maximum of 6 hours.
6, okay.
is that the agreement that you sign with Public Works?
No, this is a different one. I think the agreement with Public Works is just to reserve the park. So you have to sign, if you want to use Hopkins Green as an example for the day, then you have to sign an agreement with Public Works Department.
Oh, that's just
But this is this would be a formal agreement where we authorize you to utilize our park on a limited basis and probably hours of operation limited to a certain part of the park. And I'm not sure what else would have been in the bidder agreement, but also that was for 3 months. So I think we wouldn't say I doubt we would allow somebody in perpetuity till an agreement for a food truck. It would make sense to me for it to be an annual type agreement.
And then how many food trucks would you allow in this truck and in each park? Would it be the same number? And
I think that's just at the discretion of city manager and council at that point. And I'm wondering out loud if it's worth going through. Do we want to set up additional standards for that, or just do we rely on the elected officials and city manager to determine if 2 is enough or if 5 is too many?
so how would you handle a situation? I'm just spitballing here. How would you handle a situation where you've got an event, let's say there's a limit of 2 or 3, and 2 of the 3 decide not to come that weekend. And so you've got an event where you've got 3 permitted food trucks. Only one of them shows up and you've got, like there's an expectation from people who are using the park that there's going to be food trucks, or maybe none of them show up that weekend. I'm just wondering if we're creating problems.
That's a different,
Yeah,
because you're talking about events there
Yeah, see, that's a
Yes, I
big
am.
difference in events
versus just on
Yeah.
a Saturday afternoon, they want to go. Yeah.
So is this in addition to, or when you have events, are there additional?
There is an event permit.
Trucks
There's even
that are
another
allowed.
permit.
That's
That's
what I
the
was
event
curious
permit.
about. That's what-
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So then you've got to have room enough for the ones that are there, on an ongoing basis, potentially, plus the ones that are permitted for events. Is that what I'm hearing?
Correct. If you have an event, and I can't remember, the Freedom something festival occurred in Brubaker, and there were 3 food trucks that we had learned about after the fact. So let's say that another food truck is the permanent food truck and goes through an agreement with city manager and city council, and they operate there for an entire year. And there's some standards that are put in with that, maybe hours of operation. And they're there, but that's okay because they have that agreement. And then we allow the special event with the 3 for that particular time. And that park is large enough to handle that. So I don't think that there would be necessarily some sort of conflict there.
Right. I just think that whoever makes that decision is going to need to consider, make sure that there's enough space for the ones that are regularly there plus additional ones for events, I guess. That would be my only.
Which would be a nice problem because right now we don't
Yeah.
have any food trucks.
I think we have one permitted in
We
the
have one.
entire city. I
In where?
think we have one, only one. Other than the ones that show up for events, we only have one.
Does that? I'm worst case scenario, I guess a little bit like what Shannon's doing there. Is there, uh, room for it getting to be an issue, or then they're just shut down? I don't know.
You mean if they saturate the market or?
So if whoever decides to set up that it's become some sort of a problem.
Well, I'm not maybe understanding, because if we have too many, the parks are big enough. The two that we're talking about, if we go forward with those two, that's still a decision that has to be made. I don't think we have a space issue. So I'm hoping that we won't have conflict with having too many in a park on those limited times when we're actually have
Right.
more than one or two.
Yeah, your only limiting factor is going to be if you need any electricity at this point, and I don't know if they need a hookup or not, but I know that was one of the things that was included in the master plan for Jordan's Point Park was,
Ultimately.
yeah.
Well, in the case of Brubaker, the concession that's there, the permanent one, is that, who gets the money for that? Roro? Is that a moneymaker for them?
I presume it has to be, because that's the only organization I'm aware of that operates in that park. So I can only imagine that all the concession proceeds go to Raro.
So then you had also at the same time some mobile home or concessions. That's sort of a competition, and
Yeah, it's-
it'd take money away from Roro, who I would prefer gets the.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah.
And that would have to be coordination between the city owns the property, but Raro for the most part runs it. So I can only imagine that if somebody applies to have a food truck there for some period of time, if it's a year, for that we would at least run that by Raro to make sure that they're okay with it. And they might want to say, except for the dates where we're going to be open for these games because we want the concessions. So there would have to be coordination between us as the property owner of the city and who's really our major tenant is Raro.
And does that need to be codified in here?
I
I wouldn't
So we
suspect so,
coordinate with
no.
Railroad?
I think you're gonna get the same thing at the city pool. And they have their own concession stand. I know in the past, the manager at times did not want any food trucks. So again, that can be handled all through the permitting process.
Yeah, I think what we're trying to distinguish here is what are land use safety zoning issues versus operational competition issues. And one question I had, Arnie, so just a checklist. On C, a mobile restaurant may operate, so VMI could have one? Or do we need to clarify WNL? And then what if there was a block party? And
Okay,
so I have three to ask about.
so what is the question about VMI? Could VMI have a mobile restaurant?
Yes,
Answer is yes, because they don't have the zoning restrictions.
I thought that, I know the answer, but I just wanted it to be out there. WNL,
Same.
same.
Well,
Well-
C2, wouldn't it? It's private.
Mm-hmm.
So that's under private, okay? And then what if there was a block party that negotiated with a food truck?
In most cases, a block party to me means they've asked for closing of a street. So that is a process also where they have to get approval for the closing of the street. So that would be an event to fall under the general events exception. So they would be allowed to be there as well if they get invited by whoever the event organizer ends up being.
Okay, thank you. I was just double checking.
Questions?
So is The city council approves, or if it's not an event, but they want to be there for 3 or 4 months, am I understanding that correctly?
I've got to ask Leslie because I know there's an internal process where if there's an event that it has to go, it goes funnels through Janie, our city clerk. She hands it over to the police department, who and Public Works and whoever else has to have a review. And then I really don't know if it is administratively approved or is it something that comes to
It's administratively approved. Yeah, I don't think we've
street
done.
closures
Street closures we do.
but not an event. It's not, okay.
Well, I'm just not understanding the difference here in an event. I mean, I know what an event is, and what are we being asked to approve for these mobile? I mean, that they,
The allowance to operate in parks and open space, in particular, which park on a day that there's not an event. So do we want to have a food truck potentially allowed to operate in Brubaker or in Jordan's Point? Maybe I'll just focus on Jordan's Point.
when it's
Forget
not an
Brubaker.
event.
Yeah, right.
When
so-
it's not an
yeah.
event. So in the summer, do we want,
Okay,
I keep saying the taco guy, maybe the hot dog guy to operate out of Jordan's Point Park to give a food option there to our residents and other visitors?
all right. So then if they apply to do that, who approves it?
That would be an agreement. So just like, I'm going to use the example of Bither Outdoor, who rented the kayaks last summer in Jordan's Point Park. They came to the city manager's office. They put a proposal together. A contract was drawn up, and that ended up going to council for approval.
That's the kind that goes to council then. Okay.
And
that's
it's a
what I was
source of
trying
revenue
to-
for the city or no? It is.
I can't tell you how much of
Okay,
that
all right,
rental
no,
would
that's
be.
a- that's
It's
an
also
element.
food. It's also food tax, meals tax
Mhm.
is on that as well, in addition to what we may have charged for the use of our property.
Okay.
That makes sense.
So I guess the question for me is, are we okay with the proposal here? Again, we're trying to get wording together ultimately for a public hearing. Or I think there was also some desire at the last meeting to maybe go through some more use and design standards specific to each park, or maybe group the parks together. So I'm trying to get an understanding of, is this sufficient to go forward, or do we want to do more work, more specifying or more detail on individual parks?
So are we, just to be following the agenda,
Oh.
should we say that we're good with the staff report? And then open up and close public comment, and then we'll discuss that, right? Does that sound good? Okay, public comment, open it up on this matter. No public comment, we will close it. And so what Arnie wants to know is, what are we going to discuss here? What do you need to know again, Arnie, you were about to say?
In general, are we okay with the proposal here that I have for you, which is to add parks to C3, an allowance of mobile restaurants may operate in public parks, with the change to the use matrix and the little note that goes along with it? Or do we want to do more work and be more specific with more use and design standards for individual parks, or even grouping parks that are similar to one another?
And so, oh, okay.
Can I ask a
Yeah.
quick
Oh, yeah,
question?
yeah.
Have you had many mobile restaurants, food trucks come to you wanting this?
No. We have one permitted in the city in general, but then Bither Outdoor last year also asked, as they were doing kayaks, can we also do food service?
Okay.
That wasn't in their contract that they had been awarded or was agreed to, but that was sort of the impetus for this, as was the concession stand in Brubaker
Right.
that they wanted to start back up, but we've already dealt with that part.
And a follow-up question. If we went forward with this and then it turned out that there were too many food trucks, could we roll it back?
We roll it back through the agreements that are presumably annual, and council just realizes, hey, we've had too many issues, too many phone calls, and therefore we're not going to allow 5 to operate in that park. We're going to pick
Okay,
our
so-
better
so
operators.
we can
That's
always,
not a zone,
yeah.
so that becomes, as you said, not a zoning issue for us, but
Yeah.
administrative issue for the
Okay.
city.
Good. Great.
So the question might also be before we go on is, are there any other parks, open spaces we want to
Right.
consider to put in the
That's-
mix?
That was my question too, Pat.
Yeah.
Are there others that we want to consider?
What about Richardson?
What about Richardson? Someone might want to say, oh, there are enough people there on summer afternoons. I want to roll up my truck over there. Maybe one of the issues might be its proximity to this, to a school, but if it's,
And it's in a it's more in a neighborhood, at least with Brubaker, you can get off the
Yeah.
street. Cause looking at the other restrictions, unless you are doing a catered event, you're not allowed in neighborhoods. You have to stay on the commercial area, which,
right, so all the sides of Richardson, except for the part that abuts to Lilburn,
yeah,
would be residential streets, right?
Yeah.
What you're saying.
Okay,
And
so not that.
probably, so we do anything, maybe not that, the neighbors might say, you know what, no, we don't want to. Right,
So so we're saying you could have one in Richardson, but it wouldn't be on this, in the park, it would be on the street.
right,
adjoining.
right. 'Cause I mean, you can't get into, you can't bring a truck into there, right? Like you can um, with Brubaker. I mean, Brubaker even being up in that parking lot or in either parking lot. Although the upper one is for Brubaker as well, right? It's not just for the pool, right?
I don't think it's signed as
Right, so-
specifically. for-
Yeah.
Conceivably, conceivably a truck could, if they enter an agreement, that
Right.
would be for the city to say, can we park in the parking lot?
mhm,
That would be up to the city to say, but you don't have that option with Richardson, right? You'd have to be in the parking lot of Lilburn Downing,
right.
and that's a whole other
Mhm.
can of worms, right? So does it sound like we want to take Richardson off the table?
Yeah.
Okay,
I
any,
think for
oth-
that reason, probably
Yeah.
just keep it Brubaker and Jordan's. Point
Right.
Park.
yeah, and not Hopkins Green, because again, would that be would that,
It is in the commercial area, but yeah. I
that's
guess-
just, we have rules for that anyway, right?
Right,
Rather than
right,
be
they're allowed to
parking,
Anyway, right.
right,
yeah,
50
on the
feet,
Street.
can't
yeah.
be more,
Right.
less than 50 feet from a restaurant or house, so we have rules for that. So if someone wants to be near Hopkins,
Yeah.
we have rules for that. Okay, they
So
don't
there-
need a permit. Okay, right, it's,
Isn't there a small park over in Fairwinds?
yep.
Yeah, there's
there
one
is.
there and there's one on Taylor Street too, but both
Oh, yeah.
in the middle of neighborhoods.
Yeah.
Just like Richardson
Yeah,
in Limekiln Park.
We
maybe.
provided this last time. Sorry if we
Yeah.
didn't, but I'm happy to hand
Yeah.
this around if you need a.
So maybe we want to just limit it to, the bigger
the
parks.
Brubaker, Jordan, is that what it's sounding like?
But excuse me, fellow commissioners, there's one possible fly in the ointment here.
Oh.
Under the definitions on page 20, this definition shall include food trucks, which is what we're in a way, we're imagining food trailers and food carts.
Hmm.
So food carts are small and could be, you could see a food cart inside Hopkins Green or Richardson Park.
I should push the.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Now, the ice cream truck issue is another one we'll
That's
take
not
up at another time, but no, I just,
So that would be a question, as Arnie said, do we want to tailor for specific?
Mhm.
So that would be something we would then want to tailor, right? But could that be left to the administrative side to say, no, you can't bring a truck. You can't do the truck because you just can't, because you can't get it in there. And they say, well, we've got a push cart for weenies or whatever. And could that be done administratively, or do we need to?
I think we should leave it at Brubaker and
Mm.
Jordan's Point Park for the same reason. Now you're getting a commercial operation in a neighborhood.
Mm.
Even if it's just a little push cart, I think it still causes
I
an issue. It'd be fine at Hopkins Green, but again, that's already in the commercial area.
Okay. John, that was your fly. What do you think? That's a
I think it escaped. It's gone.
I got out of the ointment. Okay. All right.
No, I just, part of this is a lot of times when we look at these zoning issues, we're looking at restrictions and we don't want to be bothering neighbors. The other side of the coin is, in this case, we want to be encouraging this in as many places for public gatherings.
Yeah.
So I'm just keeping that in mind.
Yeah.
Could be, Leslie, since you're going to be leaving, or any indication of where would land on this before you
I
go?
think it's just keep it at this point to Jordan's point and,
Okay.
Brubaker.
Mhm.
But I think otherwise it looks good. I think the permit process will take care of most of it. And I look forward to maybe having a food truck Thursdays down in Jordan's Point Park for lunch or something.
Okay.
Someday.
All right. So Leslie said she's
Yeah,
gonna be
I
leaving here
have
at
to go to
whichever
a work
point.
session.
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So further discussion?
I have like an extremely small picky thing.
Good.
Which is I'd like to add the word "and" to the footnote. And here's why. So if you look under C3 before, this would be real clear, but if somebody were just looking at the use matrix, and if they were to read the note, mobile restaurants only allowed in Jordan's Point Park and Brubaker Field Sports Complex with a written agreement, I think there's a slight ambiguity
Mhm.
that somebody could mistakenly read that to intend that you could have a food truck in another park by right, but that you need the written agreement in order to do it in Jordan's Point and Brubaker. And this could be easily resolved by adding the word "and" after the word "complex"
And with
And
a,
with,
with a written agreement from the city of Lexington. Does
Yeah.
that make sense?
yes.
yeah,
They'd be reading it wrong, but I presume if we can add a word "and" prevent misreading, it's
those things are
Agreed.
extremely helpful. So thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If I could just offer one other little bit of observation. Lots of times I recommend just sort of do the conservative thing first. And then if we find
Yeah.
that we have food trucks in these two and they work fine,
Yeah.
then we may want to expand and allow the cart in Richardson. Or if somebody comes to us with the cart that wants to be in Richardson, then yes, they may have to actually go back and amend the zoning ordinance, but then we have a specific user that's going to tell us how he's going to operate in a specific way. And then maybe we can utilize that to tailor an amendment.
And I would add on to that food truck culture doesn't really exist here yet, but
No.
this may be a step towards that, in which case it may be appropriate to alter it down the road.
You see two on the outskirts of town, and one on 11 North is often there, and one on 60 East is often there. By the Foothill Mamas complex
Yeah.
next door. So, but not in the city, right?
Is the hogback one over at Kroger, that one's allowed because it's private property? Is that why?
Mhm.
It's
That's
there.
commercial privately zoned.
So Kroger must be giving them written permission to do it.
We had to check with them to make sure. So
Yeah.
we're good.
Okay. So it sounds like we're pretty happy with these, this Arnie's, suggested emendation, and then with John's eye for syntax, putting in that word "and." So are we looking for do we need a motion? No, we don't need a motion, right? We just want to say, go ahead and advertise this
I
next
think give
time.
get a general indication that
Yeah,
that would be lovely to
yes,
for me to go ahead and advertise it for a public hearing for a batch B for just the mobile restaurant.
are we all good with that?
Yes.
All good, heads nodding, yes.
Does really quickly though, under I,
Mhm.
where it says trash receptacles, does it have to be noted in there that they remove the trash, or do they not have to remove the trash?
Nobody's going to pick it up. So yeah, they have to remove the trash. But the point is we should be a little bit more specific.
Yes.
Wouldn't hurt.
Yeah,
Mhm.
I think it's there, but we can certainly probably dispose of by the operator.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yes.
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah, you might think, oh, we put it in the trash can, it's properly disposed
Yeah.
of.
Yeah, particularly downtown, it might be very tempting just to
Leave it.
throw it in our trash
Yeah.
can. We can add that.
Okay, good.
So does it warrant saying properly disposed off site? So that, because somebody could actually say, okay, properly disposed of, I'm putting it into a city trash
Yeah.
can.
I thought of that too.
Okay, so,
Removed from the park by the
Jen,
operator of the mobile restaurant.
We'll come up with something.
Okay, okay.
But yeah, I see your point.
Yeah.
So we're happy with that. We're okay to go ahead for it to do that. Okay, yeah. So that bring us to other business. Zoning and planning report.
Just two things. We received a variance application, and so we will be getting the Board of Zoning Appeals together in May for a meeting. And we did put out or advertised the request for proposals for the windshield survey that we had mentioned before. The city was fortunate to receive a community development block grant, planning grant to do a windshield survey, which will provide an assessment of the condition of all housing units in the city. And that was advertised, I believe it's sometime in May that those folks have to respond to that RFP. That's all I have.
When do you expect that group to start meeting?
Probably not until we get those proposals back. So maybe in May might be the first. I should be circling back and letting everybody know that.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Anything need be said on the annual PC milestones, ongoing remaining items?
So from here, do we start with cottage housing next?
I need
So-
to provide
so
you
instead of
with an
batch B,
introduction.
or-
Mhm,
Or that's our next batch B?
correct. And then Kate reminded me earlier, because after cottage housing, there was a batch B for. Well, there was another item. Oh, and after entrance corridors, there were still, mini warehouses.
Mini warehouse.
Using design standards for mini warehouses.
Mhm.
That had been pushed a little bit
Yeah.
further.
Okay.
So that's our plan of attack.
Is that gonna get added to this list then? Gotcha.
Great.
Thank you.
Okay, so what might our next meeting be looking like then? Our April 25th meeting? Are there any hearings or anything?
Nothing's been submitted, so you will get an introductory to cottage housing.
Okay, good.
Great.
Good, good. Thanks. All right. Okay. Oh, we should have amended the agenda to have Leslie give her city council report early. But I guess if we had something urgent, she would have said, move me up. So we do not have that unless she.
Nothing provided. Good.
Well, she almost could have stayed till the end, turns out. Unless there's anything else and unless someone says something,
They move to adjourn?
Second.
all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? Keep it to yourself. Thank you very much.